What's up guys, I'm here with my Enhancement Shaman DPS guide for Legion pre-patch, patch 7.0.3. In this guide I'm going to go over your talents, your spells and abilities, your stat priority, and then just your DPS rotation for single target and AoE, which are both practically the same, and then demonstrate those on the dummy here. And then wrap up with some macros and add-ons you can use to help yourself out. Let's go ahead and jump into the talents. Now, in your first tier, Boulder Fist is going to be your go-to. Replaces your Rock Biter, which is your Maelstrom generating ability. Gives it 2 charges, a small recharge timer, and it makes it better. It makes it do more damage, and it also buffs you by 5% extra damage and an extra 5% crit, as well as generating more Maelstrom than Rockbiter does, which is important because you don't have that many globals to be generating Maelstrom all the time, so it's important to kind of have this burst Maelstrom generation potential. Hot Hand, very unreliable. It's a proc chance that makes your Lava Lash cost no Maelstrom, so it's free and it does more damage, but it's very unreliable and just doesn't quite compare to 5% extra damage and crit and this burst Maelstrom generation. Windsong, kind of a similar deal. It's better, but between the low uptime because of the 20-second duration and the 45-second cooldown, and the fact that it just increases your attack speed by a good amount, but it just doesn't benefit you the same way that Boulder Fist does. And you'll see that in the rotation. So Boulder Fist pretty much all the time. At level 30, it's a kind of utility spells between like movement and healing. I like Wind Rush Totem. It's a 2-minute cooldown, you drop the totem, and anyone who runs by it gets a speed buff. And if they run by it again while it's still down, they actually refresh that speed buff. So it's kind of a unique movement speed talent, and it can help your raid out. If you're not interested in that, you do a Feral Lunge, which is a 30-second cooldown charge, essentially. You do a small amount of damage, but you just charge to the target. Pretty simple. And then Rainfall is a heal. It's like Healing Rain, but instant for Enhancement Shamans. And it doesn't do that much healing, but you can use it if you really want to, if you just want to mess around with it. So whatever you kind of like here, prefer, and what fits the situation of the raid. Now in the next tier, it's all CC as well, so nothing really relevant to your DPS. Just briefly, Lightning Surge Totem is an improved cap totem. You can place it wherever you want, and it blows up after 2 seconds instead of the 5 by default from WoD. Earth Grab Totem is an AoE root totem, same kind of deal. You drop it wherever, it roots things around it. And then Voodoo Totem is the same, but with Hex. So it replaces your Hex and you just drop a totem, and then things that run through get hexed if they're able to be hexed. Not really useful in raid. I generally would use Lightning Surge Totem just because stuns are more useful, but kind of up to you, whatever you want to mess around with here. Now level 60, Hailstorm is going to be your default, your go-to. Makes your Frostbrand apply an extra damage buff to your attack, so when you attack you do some extra frost damage. It's kind of nice because Mastery will buff that damage, as it buffs all your frost damage, as well as fire and nature, and just goes pretty nicely for single target. Now, if you have sustained AoE, Ancestral Swiftness is going to do a lot better. Then the more sustained AoE there is, the better this gets, because Haste reduces the cooldown of one of your abilities, Crush Lightning, actually a couple of your abilities, but this one for AoE mainly, and this helps your AoE a lot. So increasing your haste will decrease the cooldown of that, and just kind of help you out more on sustained AoE. But Hailstorm for single target over Ancestral Swiftness. Lightning Shield never really worth taking. It's got a chance to do damage every time you do damage or take melee damage. It's pretty minuscule compared to 10% haste buff or this extra auto attack damage, but it's frost damage. So Hailstorm, single target. Ancestral Swiftness, if you want to, you can do it on sustained AoE. If things are dying really quickly though, I wouldn't necessarily go with this one. So at level 75, you're going to want Empowered Stormlash for raids, dungeons, and such, any kind of group content, because Stormlash now spreads. It makes sure this passive Stormlash apply to 1 extra target. So instead of 2 targets, 2 extra party or raid members that get this buff that makes them do extra damage, it increases it to 3 people, and it makes this Stormlash damage deal 35% more damage. So it's just very, very nice for raid groups. Anything where there's essentially enough people to get buffed by it. So anything where you've got 3 or more people, this is going to be a go-to. Tempest, if you were alone, would be okay, but in general, for purposes of this guide, not really that great. This makes your Stormbringer, which gives you a lower cost Stormstrike, apply to 2 Stormstrikes instead of 1. And it's nice, but it just doesn't compare to the extra damage going on constantly, essentially. And Overcharge is just not great. Makes your Lightning Bolt cost Maelstrom, and make it do a lot more damage than it normally does. It gives us a cooldown too, but as you'll see in the rotation section, it's really important that you gain lots of Maelstrom quickly, and you don't want to be spending it on stuff that's not Stormstrike or your buffs or Crash Lightning. So this just doesn't really synergize well with the whole rotation right now. Level 90, Crashing Storm is going to be your choice for pretty much every situation in the PvE raid setting. It makes your Crash Lightning put a little ground debuff that does the extra damage over 6 seconds, and it makes it worth using in single target as well as AoE because it becomes better damage per Maelstrom spent than, say, Lava Lash. So this is a really good ability for that, and the other two choices just aren't that great. Fury of Air, it's got really low damage per Maelstrom even, and it sucks it away over time, which is kind of bad because you do want to be able to pool your Maelstrom to use it on the abilities that are important, like Stormstrike. Sundering, same kind of problem. It doesn't do quite enough damage for how much Maelstrom it costs. It's got a lower damage to Maelstrom cost than Stormstrike, and it's got a pretty big cooldown at 40 seconds. And so it just kind of takes away, makes you spend a lot of Maelstrom on an ability that you probably don't want to if you could help it. Plus, this Crashing Storm, making Crash Lightning part of your single target rotation, actually scales very well with your Haste and Mastery, which we'll get into in the stat priority, but those are your best stats essentially, and as you get more gear, this actually gets better and better because Mastery increases your nature damage, and Haste reduces the cooldown of Crash Lightning. Level 100, by default, Landslide is going to be your go-to. It just makes your Boulder Fist, or Rock Biter if you don't have Boulder Fist, increase your agility by 8%. And this is a buff that's up all the time in the fight, literally 100% unless you can't hit the boss for a while. But even if you can't, like when you get to the boss, you will be able to use it and put this buff up again. So it's essentially a straight 8% agility buff, which is huge and really, really good. Now, if the fights are really short, which sometimes they are right now in HSC with the nerf, Ascendance is a really nice cooldown to line up with Legendary Ring at the start of the fight, and the shorter the fight, the better this gets right now versus Landslide, of course, because it's burst and it's extra burst. And so anything like that with a super short fight, Ascendance will pull ahead, and it's very nice to kind of get your numbers up there. It makes you generate extra Maelstrom per second, and makes your Stormstrike and auto attacks ranged and wind, so they bypass armor. So it's a nice cooldown, and something you can use if the fights are really short, but the longer the fight goes, the better Landslide gets versus Ascendance. Earthen Spike, just not a great choice. Costs 30 Maelstrom's got a 20-second cooldown. Does decent damage, but it's another Maelstrom spender that you don't really want. Plus, the buff you get for nature damage and physical damage only lasts 10 seconds, and it's a 20-second cooldown, so you're losing out on an 8% agility increase 100% of the time for a physical damage and nature damage buff half the time, or you're giving up this huge burst cooldown. So Landslide in general, but if it's a really, really short fight, Ascendance will get you better burst, and if the fight ends, of course, then that will get you higher numbers. So those are your talents. Now let's go ahead and look at your spells and abilities. First up is Stormstrike. Stormstrike costs 40 Maelstrom, does a lot of damage, short cooldown reduced by haste. Pretty simple. Now Lava Lash is kind of your Maelstrom dump. It costs 30 Maelstrom, doesn't have a cooldown, but doesn't do that much damage. It's a little bit of fire damage. Now Crash Lightning, generally seen as an AoE ability, and it pretty much is, except if you take Crashing Storm down here at level 90, it's actually usable and should be used in your single target rotation. What it does a little bit of damage, and it's got a short cooldown reduced by haste, and if it hits more than one target, so if it hits 2+ targets, then it makes your Stormstrike and your Lava Lash cleave in front of you with the Crash Lightning damage. So not with their full damage, but just with the Crash Lightning damage. That's a nice AoE cleave ability. As far as weapon enhancements go, you got Flame Tongue. It's a 10-second cooldown, doesn't cost anything. It's free, does some small, moderate damage, and then makes you do more damage when you auto-attack, a little extra fire damage on each one. And Frostbrand, you will only use if you take Hailstorm, because by default it just does small damage and then slows things with your auto-attacks, but with Hailstorm it actually increases the damage because every time you attack with your weapons, you actually deal extra frost damage. So when you take that, you will be using Frostbrand to do this extra damage. We do have Boulder Fist. Now normally by default it's called Rock Biter, so if you didn't take the talent at level 15, you're going to see it as Rock Biter, but Boulder Fist, which I recommend, is a 2-charge system. It's got a short cooldown, reduced by haste, and it generates 25 Maelstrom, which is a lot, and it's really cool, and does a good amount of damage. And then it increases your crit strike chance by 5%, your damage by 5%, and if you took Landslide, it also increases your agility by 8%. For cooldowns, we've got Feral Spirit. It's your 2-minute DPS cooldown, summons your 2 Ghost Wolves. They do damage, they attack stuff that you're attacking, and they generate 5 Maelstrom per attack. So you're going to be generating lots and lots of Maelstrom when you use this, so just make sure you don't overcap when you do pop this cooldown. Of course, we've got Bloodlust or Heroism for when your raid leader calls for that. And we've got our Interrupt and Wind Shear, pretty simple, 12-second cooldown, ranged interrupt. We've got your Offensive Dispel and Purge, just to buff, take off helpful abilities or buffs from enemies. And then your defensive cooldown, your Astral Shift. It's a 1.5-minute cooldown, makes you take 40% less damage, this is quite nice. I do have movement abilities in Ghost Wolf, which turns you into this little wolf and makes you run a bit faster. And then Spirit Walk, which breaks your roots or snares that are on you, and then makes you move really quickly. Now, as far as CC, we've got Hex. It's a short cast. It's kind of like Polymorph, just CCs a target into a frog, and then it can be broken by damage. It doesn't break instantly on damage, but it does break after some damage. Finally, we've got a Healing Surge. It costs mana, but if you have 20 Maelstrom, it will take 20 Maelstrom instead and make it instant cast. So just make sure you're not starving yourself with Maelstrom, but it is there if you need to heal. Now, I left Lightning Bolt for last because it's practically useless. It is a DPS spell technically, and if you can't melee the boss or use your abilities that have a short range, then you can use this while you're running to the boss. Using it while you're on the boss though, meleeing, as any spell will, it kind of resets your swing timer, so you're going to lose out actually on a lot of damage if you use Lightning Bolt, so you're better off just auto-attacking in a sense. As far as passives go, we do have Stormbringer. It has a proc chance to reset the cooldown on your Stormstrike and make it cost 50% less, so 20 Maelstrom instead of 40. Then it also doesn't trigger the cooldown, so when you use a Stormstrike that has this buff up, you will actually be able to use it again, but it'll be 40 the next time because it's full cost. Stormlash is that buff I was talking about earlier with this talent, Empowered Stormlash, and normally it spreads to 2 targets, and when your weapons are enhanced, so like Frostbrand, Flame Tongue type things, you can grant people this buff that makes them do extra nature damage, and with Empowered Stormlash it's up to 3 people rather than 2, and it makes it do a little bit more damage. And then Wind Fury is just a proc chance to hit twice, an extra 2 attacks on the target. So those are your spells and abilities. Now let's go ahead and talk about your stat priorities briefly. As an Enhancement Shaman, you want haste to a certain point, then mastery, and then critical strike, and then versatility is your worst. Now, haste up to 17% is a breakpoint in which you lower the cooldown of your swing timer, so you swing more often, your melee attack more often. Your cooldowns get really low, your Crash Lightning, your Stormstrike, your Boulder Fist, and then they just benefit each other quite nicely. So haste up to about 17% or so, and then mastery kind of takes over from there once you reach that breakpoint. Now they do synergize very well, they go very well together, and they work well because mastery increases the chance for Stormbringer, the free Stormstrike proc, or not free, but half cost, and Wind Fury, the extra attacks, your extra auto attack procs. But it also increases your Fire, Frost, and Nature damage by a significant amount. This is where the real value comes in. So, as you can imagine, getting haste up and mastery up is actually together is really, really nice. So after you get 17% haste, you do want to kind of bring them up a little bit together. Now mastery is still better at that point, but you do want to kind of bring your haste up with it if possible. And the reason is, if you think about it, you increase your swing timer, and you have these enhancements that make you do extra fire and frost damage with every swing. So the faster you swing, the more often your extra damage procs, and then mastery buffs that damage, as well as your other damage from, say, Boulder Fist and Lava Lash, as well as using Crash Lightning, Boulder Fist, and Stormstrike more often. So it synergizes very well. So haste until 17%, then mastery after that, but haste after that is also pretty good. The crit and versatility are just kind of really bad stats for you. They don't really they don't go with anything you do. They don't proc with anything or interact with your spec. So they're really just not as good as the other two. So just to recap, haste to 17% or so, then Mastery, and then more Haste to go with the Mastery, but Mastery then being your best stat over Haste, and then Critical Strike and Versatility at the bottom. So now let's talk about your rotation. Now, as I mentioned at the start of this video, your single target and AoE are practically the same rotation, and you could actually do them in literally the same order, minus one thing. So I'll get into that in a little bit. For your single target, you're going to want to keep your buffs up, and that's your Boulder Fist, your Frostbrand, and your Flame Tongue. In that order, in priority, you want those buffs running 100% of the time. There's no reason you should ever let them drop unless the boss runs away from you and you just can't hit them with those abilities. Other than that, never let them drop. Boulder Fist, again, will generate a bunch of Maelstrom, so just keep that in mind, and you will have to spend some to get Frostbrand up, but Flame Tongue is free, so keep those 3 buffs up, and then Stormstrike becomes your number 1 ability after your buffs are active for single target. It does a lot of damage, so make sure you keep this rolling. Plus, you want it on cooldown as much as possible, so that you don't waste procs of Stormbringer, which reset the cooldown. After that, you will want to use Crash Lightning on cooldown, and then after that, if you need to dump Maelstrom a little bit, then you can use Lava Lash, but you don't want to starve yourself from Maelstrom, because you don't have that much opportunity to build it, so only when you're really high on Maelstrom, just to avoid capping, not even to dump, really, but just to avoid capping. So when you're like above 100, 110, something like that, then you might want to consider using Lava Lash if nothing else is available, like Frostbrand, Stormstrike, or Crash Lightning to take Maelstrom. And then after that, of course, don't forget that Boulder Fist is a 2-charge system, so you want it rolling all the time. So if you already have all your buffs up, Stormstrike's on cooldown, Crash Lightning's on cooldown, or you need some Maelstrom, then you can use Boulder Fist as well. And then very, very, very last priority, if nothing is, like, everything's off on cooldown, all your buffs are up, and you don't have enough Maelstrom to Lava Lash safely, then Flame Tongue, just for a little bit of extra damage. It's free, and it's there, and it will refresh that buff anyway, which is nice. That's your single target rotation, and the only thing that changes for AoE is that you replace Crash Lightning above Stormstrike, and this is 3+ targets, because that's where the Crash Lightning damage starts to kind of outweigh the non-buffed Stormstrike, and non-buff meaning the cleave ability from Crash Lightning that makes this cleave. So the more targets there are, the higher priority Crash Lightning becomes, but it's literally the same thing. You keep your buffs up, and then you Crash Lightning, and then you Stormstrike, and that's the only difference. So, to recap, keep your buffs up, generate Maelstrom when you need to, Stormstrike on cooldown, and Crash Lightning on cooldown, and then of course switch those priorities for single target or AoE. And then at very high levels of Maelstrom, you dump with Lava Lash just once or twice, and then just Flame Tongue if there's nothing else to do. Again, Lightning Bolt only if you have to run and you can't actually melee the boss, otherwise it's completely worthless. Alright, now I'll go ahead and demonstrate on this dummy. As for the opener, we do want to get our 3 buffs up in the priority order that they are in our rotation, so Boulder Fist, Frostbrand, and Flame Tongue. But if you have the 4-piece, then Flame Tongue does buff your nature spell damage. So if you have the 4-piece, you would open with Flame Tongue first, then Boulder Fist because it increases its damage, and then Frostbrand. But basically you get your 3 buffs up in the opener, pop your cooldowns, and then do your rotation. Because I have the 4-piece, I'm going to start with Flame Tongue. So go ahead, Flame Tongue, Boulder Fist, Frostbrand, cooldowns, Stormstrike, and then Boulder Fist for some extra Maelstrom here, and then I accidentally Boulder Fist there, but I want to Stormstrike as much as possible. Crash Lightning on cooldown, now my buffs are coming up, so I'll use the Fire buff, get some Maelstrom, use Frost buff, and then dump a little because I'm really, really high there. And I'm high again after I Boulder Fist for some more Maelstrom, so I'll dump with some Lava Lashes. Stormstrike's up, and so is Crash Lightning, so I'll use Boulder Fist to generate some here, refresh my buffs, and then Stormstrike is up, so I'll use that as much as possible. Crash Lightning, build some Maelstrom, Stormstrike, Boulder Fist for some more Maelstrom, Stormstrike's up again, Crash Lightning on cooldown. Now my buffs are getting pretty low here, so I'll refresh the Fire one, refresh the Frost one, Boulder Fist for Maelstrom, Crash Lightning on cooldown, and then here I'm just waiting for Boulder Fist, and then Stormstrike is up. I didn't want to use Lava Lash because I was pretty low on Maelstrom there, so really important not to starve yourself with Maelstrom. Now here I'll just Flame Tongue for a little extra damage, Crash Lightning on cooldown, Boulder Fist is up, gotta refresh my Frost, and then Crash Lightning is coming up pretty soon. Build some Maelstrom here, and then use it on Stormstrike, Crash Lightning, Boulder Fist, and so on. Now I'm pretty high, so I'll use one Lava Lash just because I was pretty high there. I'll refresh my Fire buff, Frost buff, my Boulder Fist buff, Crash Lightning's on cooldown or off cooldown, Stormstrike's up, and then you just keep going like so. Now the only time, sometimes like here, there's nothing much to do, so you could maybe Flame Tongue if there's nothing, but that's pretty much how it goes. Only use Level Ash when you're really, really high on Maelstrom, so you don't overcap. It's literally the only reason. Stormstrike. Now, if you're doing AoE, you just prioritize your Crash Lightning higher than your Stormstrike. So here where I have both up, if it was AoE, I would just Crash Lightning first, then Stormstrike a bunch, as much as possible, and that's how it would always go. You would just prioritize that. So it's very similar to the single target rotation. You just kind of flip the priorities. Even if you were to do your single target rotation purely, and just do it that way, you wouldn't lose out that much, because you don't generally delay Crash Lightning that long. Now, the faster your abilities recharge, so the higher your haste, especially, and also your mastery, just your gear as it goes up, but especially as you get more haste, you actually get a smoother rotation, just because there's less dead time. There's more Crash Lightnings coming up, more Boulder Fists coming up, meaning more Maelstrom, meaning you can get more Stormstrikes out, which also has a lower cooldown, and so on. So it picks up the pace. So the higher your gear goes, the smoother it goes, but also just kind of, so there's less dead time. It means you're actively pushing buttons a lot, which can be quite fun. Now, that's pretty much just it for the rotation. Just do that, and then as your cooldowns come up, of course, line it up with whatever you can, like Legendary Ring and stuff. And as far as macros and add-ons go, I don't use any macros right now. I don't think there's anything worth really lining up. You could macro maybe your ring and your wolves, but that's pretty dangerous. Just let your raid leader tell people when to pop the ring, in case you're not in charge of that. And also, you just use it with the ring, essentially. So when someone pops the ring, use your spirit, your feral spirit. As far as add-ons, I am using weak auras. Got several things here for enhancements. There's a lot of things you want to keep track of, although you don't need all of them, of course. Your buff timers are really important. You do want some sort of tracker for your buff timers, so that you know you never want them to run off. So I have one for Boulder Fist, Frostbrand, and Flame Tongue. And on the sides, I've got cooldown timers for Stormstrike, for Crash Lightning, and then Boulder Fist as well, as a cooldown and a timer, or stack rather, tracker, because I want to know when it's available to use for Maelstrom, so I don't have to keep looking down at my bars, for example. Other things you could do, you could put a Feral Spirit timer, things like that, just to help track whatever, but this is what I have right now. The main things is you do want some way of knowing when your buffs are coming off, so that you make sure you don't lose out on those. So that's pretty much it for this video. If you like the video, please feel free to hit it with a like. If you like to see more content like this, or want to support the channel, feel free to subscribe, so you know when I'm putting out new content and just what's going on. And thanks for watching. Cheers, guys.